Welcome back to Data Center News Asia. So let's start with the finance news, not a big deal. And this continues to give us press juice. This is like the old Global Switch deal, the AirTron deal. But DayOne, latest update on DayOne saga. So the $20 billion IPO is still in process, of course, but surprisingly, that may have triggered some interest from large buyers. MGX is one, and so Reuters has reported, as well as I think I saw a couple of social media posts on this, not from either company, but yeah, just a lot of analysts talking about this. Yes, so MGX, which is the Abu Dhabi, well, one of the Abu Dhabi investment groups, are, I don't know if it's in the running, how they describe it, but there's an interest there in purchasing DayOne.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm not mistaken, MGX was spun out of Mubadala, who of course have already got pretty significant exposure to the space, but I think MGX was essentially set up specifically to focus on AI, and of course data centers being a big part of that. They're already involved in the OpenAI Stargate project, I assume for the Middle East part. Also apparently looking to invest in Anthropic, and yeah, DayOne is the latest firm they have potentially with their eyes on.
And they own aligned with GIP BlackRock as well, which is also part of GIP BlackRock, Microsoft, MGX kind of investment vehicles. So yeah, MGX are a pretty serious player in the space. This would fit the profile of big, chunky, de-risked, but like later, de-risked in the sector, but later stage investments. I think Cillian could argue that DayOne has played a very smart card here with their round C and their IPO and driving clear valuation here from the platform. But yeah, exciting stuff.
Yeah, well, they've got a lot of installed capacity and a pretty significant pipeline as well. So
yeah, that makes sense. DigitalBridge are considering the sale of Malaysia's NextDC. Now, for those of you who don't keep too much eye on investment stories, this might cause a bit of a deja vu. DigitalBridge didn't long buy AIMS data center, so AIMS is the...
74 years ago, it's 2022, 10 out of 2022.
So we're veterans.
Yeah, Rav.
So AIMS, for those who don't know, was the data center, like it was an AIMS tower. It's part of Tan.com Berhad in Malaysia, and this was part of the original raft of telco asset sell-offs. DigitalBridge was one of the more vociferous buyers of said assets. They never rolled this platform into Vantage, which at the time was thought they would, which is their flagship kind of platform in Asia. They kept it separate, and now it looks like they get this $2 billion valuation, like it will pay off.
Yeah, it was, I don't know about the role into Vantage piece. Yeah, that was speculated, but AIMS certainly at the time was more seen as a retail player, I guess. Or if that kind of changed when they secured some pretty chunk hyperscale leases in their CyberJaya side as well. So it became a bit of a, I don't say competitive advantage, but it was maybe not the obvious differentiation or delineation as may have been when they acquired the two firms. But yeah, 2 billion, trying to get 2 billion out of it. This is 3 sites in KL.
Yeah, not
sorry, 4 in Malaysia, and then an additional smaller one in Bangkok. I believe previously they've been looking across other markets in Southeast Asia.
Vietnam on the website, and that seems to have disappeared, so I guess they get back on that.
Yeah, maybe, who knows.
Speaking of Vietnam, these were last talked about Vietnam. This is the story. Gorilla Technology, so this is, I hesitate to use the term neocloud because Gorilla seems to be branding as a full AI infrastructure build, as they will build the data center, is what we speculated the other way when they talked about their Vietnam site. But Gorilla Technology, which is a UK headquartered firm, has secured a $2.5 billion GPU as a service contract in Indonesia. Was it $2.5 billion? I don't know if it was the megawatts in here, but so we always say what? In modern economics, 70% of the total capex now would be the GPUs. So you take a 100 billion site, a 400 billion, 100 billion site, 400 million would include GPUs. 5 years, though, is a much shorter contract, so I don't know how you do. I haven't prepared myself to do the backward math to work out the size of this actual facility.
Yeah, we should probably sit down with a pen and pencil, or even run it into some sort of AI system, and just get to the bottom of these economics, because this is the way a lot of these AI neocloud style deals are now being reported. So it's not in the megawatt language that we're probably more familiar with. But a couple of the highlights from this. So this is NeutraDC Batam facility, which they've been developing over the last 2-ish years, and it's nearly ready to come online. It was topped off a couple of months ago. And it's, targeting deployment September 26, so relatively soon. First phase, 100 B300s. And then it's saying the first phase alone will generate 1.3 billion in revenue over a 5-year period.
Does this match on to so the Gorilla had design capacity with NeutraDC in Batam, so they're using this data center, or is...
This is Batam.
But is this capacity all going to go into NeutraDC, or, because the way they brand it is though Gorilla were building, but...
I think it was just once.
Okay, so then this is the offtake agreement into NeutraDC. Interesting. Cool. A couple of AZ announcements this week as well. Ali Cloud has launched a 5th data center in Japan, which again in Ali power and speed they've taken capacity in a 5th data center in Japan. They don't do the traditional American tree loading AZs. So this would be, so the press release is confusing because they keep calling it a 5th data center and they normally call it a 5th region. So I don't know how this will appear on
No, so this is same region, so the Tokyo region, the 5th facility within the region. So it's just 5th deployment essentially. So what's the 5th significant deployment? And they have pops and stuff like that elsewhere. But Ali's been taking significant capacity. They were one of the biggest players in capacity in Tokyo over the last 12, 24 months, including some, a variety of facilities, some up and inside, some out west Tokyo. They're not, I don't think they're as constrained as like Amazon or Microsoft when it comes to their regions, their availability zones. So I think they, so there's a bit more flexibility, but again, just more evidence that the Chinese hyperscalers are really ramping up presence, not only in Southeast Asia, but they are looking at capacity in some of the markets, which a couple of years ago we would have reported and said they probably weren't got there.
A lot of people would have
the narrative a bit.
not spent too much time with the customer based on their previously smaller kind of pops.
2 megawatts. So.
Yeah, they made it regret that. Another local zone here from Amazon back in 2021, or the new cloud region. Amazon has launched a local zone in Hanoi, which is their first in local zone edge cloud locations. So this is the less available services and small deployment.
Yeah, essentially. So local zone offers some of the cloud services, but without the 3 availability zone architecture. So quite often this is a precursor to what becomes a full-blown region. This is where a lot of the initial people go into. I think in AWS's case, can scale to 12, but are typically, I think, can be as small as 500, or 500 kilowatts, but can scale to 12, if I'm not mistaken.
So not a big need in terms of capacity, but this typically is the precursor to a market going pop. Once this happens, they'll sell it to the cloud, they'll generate demand for themselves. Typically, other competing cloud providers will see if there's success in the market and will race to follow it. And we don't quite know how this will work with the AI economics, whether this will lead to big deployments from American hyperscalers in Vietnam. But obviously, there's already GPU deployments being looked at in Vietnam, so Vietnam back on the radar.
Yeah, it's been a while since we reported on that.
Yeah, Amazon, we're still with the AWS stories since they're alphabetically lined up my screen. AWS has pledged about $13 billion in AI cloud infrastructure in India. And again, the way this typically works is the marketing department have rifled through the CapEx spend on various different categories in India and gone, here's another 13 billion. Consider us cynical in that regard, but I think that again, this is a further indicator of just continued growth and investment in India, and it's a story that doesn't get old.
Yeah, this is, as per this article, which I think we're both reading the same one, so it builds on 2025 commitments. So to your point, a lot of this is sometimes double reporting or kind of recycling subsea cable announcements, about data center announcements, etc., or even fiber. But it looks like this is an additional 13 billion. So the report here says the total investments between 2026 and 2030 across all Amazon businesses will be $48 billion.
And that is some change. Another Amazon one here from Melbourne. This is a smaller story, but it segues into a big story. So Amazon has into recycled water supply agreement with the Greater Western Water Plant data center in Melbourne. Data centers have been coming under a lot of fire recently for water consumption. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I think people are often conflating the water that is used in, you can call it scope 3 water, scope 3 emissions, but think of it as scope 3 emissions, the water that's used in the power production. So any power that's produced via gas, coal, even nuclear is produced in a turbine using a lot of water, and that's being attributed to data centers in some reports, which is a bit disingenuous. But nonetheless, data center water use is still important. It's just the extremist numbers on either side are a bit nonsense. And there was actually a meeting in London this week in the climate conferences, but they made a global pact for urban data centers, which included Melbourne. And the pact has got a couple of rules that are important, I think, for developers. 3 pillars or 4 pillars are minimizing public health burdens, publishing measurable benchmarks on sustainability, public health metrics, and meeting energy demand without new building costs. So they're focusing on brownfield generation, which actually, to be fair, we've seen some good work examples in Melbourne recently.
Yeah, even just going back to this AWS story, I think this is interesting because the key thing here is that it's recycled water, and this is something which a couple of the operators in Australia have been talking about, not only in Australia but across Southeast Asia as well in some cases. So it doesn't specifically say if this is grey water or if this water is water which would be cold water is recycled, right? So I don't know exactly what this means in this context, but
we should get a water expert on the conversation, because there is, it sounds sometimes a little mundane, but it's very important issue to communities, and there's a huge difference between recycled water, potable water is the water.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious. Is this potable water or is this grey water? Because if data centers, if they're seen to be taking water that's not potable, I think that's that puts a lot of people's minds at ease. Yes. This is one, maybe a water expert will come on and tell us a bit more about this, but again, this is a bit like the additionality piece, where if we can help facilitate this kind of technology in these plants, then
we've got an interesting power guest coming on from Vina, so if anyone does have a recommendation for a water expert who wants to come on in conversation, then DM us, that would be fantastic. Sticking with Melbourne, for now, NextDC has bought 169 hectares in old imperial language outside of Melbourne, and this is this is near Geelong, a lovely part of the country,
right.
There's about to be an enormous data centre there, but nice stretch of the coastline on the Great Ocean Road.
Yeah, 70 kilometres west of Melbourne, so yeah, typically the larger facilities in Melbourne are down the north near the airport and then out west. Interesting here, it's close to a major substation, and even potentially more interesting, the Victorian Big Battery site. So it doesn't necessarily say it's going to be tied in with that, but I would expect there to be some sort of link up there.
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of this now, particularly around Victoria and New South Wales developments, where BESS or tying to BESS seems to be the best way to convince the community that you are able to put your data center load without impacting their local load.
We're right at the end, we're probably over time in fact, but let's rattle through these. Paragon Globe has agreed to sell 65 acres of land in Johor to DayOne, so DayOne's appetite for capacity in Johor does not look like it's slowing down anytime soon.
How many hectares to an acre are we?
Another Malaysia story, so I think I'm under NDA on this particular story, but Malaysia State Development Agency has developed 65 megawatt data center with a domestic operator, so we're going to see news about that. 2 final finance ones, let's finish off with. Centuria Group does raise 300 million Aussie dollars. So this is for their new platform, and it's also for their ResetData AI business as well. Yeah, congrats to them. And then finally, confirming our previous reporting on the PLDT story, they are in fact, this says 24 megawatts as opposed to what we reported on 27, but we were in the right ballpark. Great. Thanks everyone for watching.